Buenos días. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Ayesha Jaco, a lifelong resident of Chicago West Side and dedicated leader in improving the health and economic vitality of her community. Ayesha serves as executive director of Westside United, a healthcare collaborative founded by Ascension, Cook County Health, Lurie Children's, Rush, Sinaya Chicago, and UI Health. Through her leadership, Westside United has built powerful partnerships with nonprofits, churches, and other anchor institutions, all working together to eliminate the 14-year life expectancy gap between Black and Brown residents on Chicago West Side and Downtown Loop, which we will be hearing today. Under her leadership, Westside United has launched impactful programs like a small business grant initiative awarding $2.5 million to support the development of over 175 Westside businesses. Her team also coordinates $10 million in social impact investments funds with partners like the American Medical Association and Northern Trust, resulting in 600 low-interest loans to support affordable housing, community development, and other economic projects. Please join me in welcome Ayesha Jaco.
Good morning. All right, thanks for the theme music. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, CFHA, for having me. I'd like to thank Nefertali, Martha again for that amazing introduction. Thank you to the team, Jackie, Heather, and Liana, who I feel like are, family now with all of the communication coming back and forth. But it really is an honor to be here with you coming from Chicago. I'm going to talk to you about a few of my communities that lead to the work that I do with Westside United. So we're going to start on a personal note. One chapter of my life also includes choreography, so I am so tempted to get everybody to stand up and do like an 8 count, but I'm not going to do that because it's morning. So I'm going to talk to you about our work in Chicago and our big, hairy, audacious goal of eradicating the life expectancy gap between Chicago's downtown and 10 communities. I'm remembering that I have a clicker. Thank you, that was probably Liana or Cassidy advancing for me, but I'm gonna do it. So, my life starts, or my life in Chicago starts via my grandmother. And she's pictured here. Her name is Bertha Lee Evans. She, to me, is a character from Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns, which chronicles the many travels of African Americans journeying from the South to different places in the North. My grandmother, coming from the Mississippi Delta, Alligator, Mississippi to be exact, came in search of a better life. She left the plantation picking cotton to come up to Chicago to initially do domestic work. And once she got settled, she brought my mom and a few other siblings. So for her, the first stop she made where she put down roots was in the North Lawndale community. And I know Neftali has spent time there in your career. And by a show of hands, how many of you have been to Chicago? Yes! Okay, the majority of you, so great. So my grandmother chose North Lawndale. North Lawndale also happened to be a gathering place for the work of a lot of prominent activists like Al Raby, organizing around housing inequities. But this was also a place where Dr. Martin Luther King came in 1966 to really shed light on the work that was happening on the ground, but more importantly, the inequities. So it is sacred ground in Chicago around 16th Street where the tenement where him and Coretta took up residence has been rebuilt into affordable housing. but the spirit and energy that Chicago galvanized at that point, along with other urban centers in the country, is very much embedded in my DNA. Because when my mother did make it to Chicago, she came a month after the riots in 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. So she inherited a Roosevelt corridor that had been freshly burnt. She inherited a community that began to see disinvestment. We had the Sears headquarters there, the world headquarters, that shut its doors roughly around 1987, but it was an anchor and provider of jobs and other things for residents like my mom. So you fast forward to 1993, where I'm around 13 years old, and my mom, who took on a career as a designer, she was a very creative woman. We ultimately moved to an area called Garfield Park. She had met my dad, and he was a very colorful character. One of the things in his toolkit was the martial arts. And he had a magic where his strategy for community development was opening karate schools in communities that had been underinvested. So as children, we grew up seeing the transformation of certain communities and these karate schools being beacons of hope and light. We're talking about the baddest kids, gangbangers coming in to my father's dojo, leaving transformed. And so there was a magic there, and there was a mantra there from my father to my siblings and I to make our communities better than we found them. So you see me there. I have my black belt because, you know, before you got a pacifier, I'm told you got a karate uniform. So we all came up in that tradition of karate mainly. So I'm there with my younger brother pictured in the middle. He has sais. That was his weapon of choice because you all had to have a weapon. And then my sister, she's holding a Chinese blade. So the experience of the dojo really transformed what we thought was possible in our city, where we would drive in my daddy's station wagon across the city of Chicago, see the difference in housing stock and other things. And I believe these experiences led me and built me and prepared me for the health equity work that we do today. Another key piece of making the community better than you found it from my dad was me and my younger brother, who happens to be a hip hop artist. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the artist Lupe Fiasco. He has a song, If You Are, yes, show of hands, I see a few. All right, great. All right, I started to play some of his music, but so what we did as our careers started to take shape, I was deeply, deeply inspired by my dad's work in the community, and that's the work that I took on. So from volunteering in the neighborhood, rounding up all the kids, going to the Mabel Manning Library to do homework help, to ultimately taking a career in social services. My younger brother decided that he would rap. Straight A student, loved science. My father was not happy about it, but he made him promise that if this is what he was going to do, he better be the best. And so I think he's been running after that ever since. But what we did, thinking about my grandmother, who I showed you earlier, thinking about my father and his creed, was we founded a foundation in 2010 in Chicago, the Lupe Fiasco Foundation. It was at the epicenter in the intersection of hip hop and philanthropy in Chicago. So you had the Common Ground Foundation, you had the Kanye West Foundation, you had Dwayne Wade's Foundation, and you had us. And our idea was that we wanted to look at food equity because unfortunately our father died prematurely from complications of cardiovascular disease, congestive heart failure, diabetes. And he was training to be an Olympian. He was our superhero, but he succumbed to that condition before the age of 55. We also saw my grandmother, who I mentioned, who passed away 2 weeks after being diagnosed with cancer. And she was in church 7 out of 8 days of the week, okay? There, planted. And so it made me think, like, wow, what if she had a community health worker there, right? Encouraging for that connection into care. So we start at the foundation. We look at food equity work. We also look at global capacity building for young people, because I had a chance to go on tour to Asia, and I was just amazed when we went to Korea, though homogenous, there was this just presence of hip hop culture and dress and all of these things. So we thought we wanted to build a bridge for young people in Chicago to international communities so that they could study the commonalities and ultimately travel there. Then we looked at education. So we did this work. We have Common and Kanye as our peers. We get a decade in. One of our inaugural programs was a coat drive. We later found that to be an ineffective strategy. But one of the things my brother said to me was, hey, Ayesha, if we are not building a coat factory, why are we doing this? Like, what is the impact? Then Chance the Rapper comes, and what does he develops? A sleeping bag that turns into a coat. A little bit more innovative, but I say all that to say we had reached our mission. We achieved our mission. We came to do what we set out to do as it related to food equity, as it related to some of the impact points that we wanted to have for Black and brown youth in Chicago. This is a picture of our inaugural board. We were based at the Northeastern Illinois University Center for Inner City Studies, where I also taught at the time, and we were at a crossroads. And I had a board member say to me, you need to read this book, The Death Gap by Dr. David Ansel. It's amazing. It's really putting out what we know to be true, because if we all packed up right now and we flew to Chicago and we took a bus from downtown into the West Side, we'd see a varying difference in terms of housing stock, grocery stores, academic profiles of schools, et cetera. So what this book did for me was just legitimize what we thought was the norm, that it was in fact abnormal. And that I thought, like, who is this alien David Ansel calling out his privilege, naming and claiming structural racism and historical disinvestment as key pillars into why we see a difference in life expectancy and quality of life. So I sat with this book and I was just amazed. And through serendipity, as I thought about my transition, leaving the foundation, I came across West Side United. And in the description of the role, it mentioned the Death Gap, Dr. David Ansel. So I was like, okay, let me try this out. Let's see what's going on here. And I was fortunate to come on 6 years ago as a consultant, initially thinking about program development, community engagement for this amazing initiative. Now, the challenge was looking at the difference in life expectancy between communities back home like Garfield Park and the Loop, and the fact that between these geographies, there was a 14-year gap, that you were more likely to live to 82 if you lived downtown, but 7 miles west, people in Garfield Park were amped to just live until 68 years old. So this was alarming. And what it did was sound off the alarm for Rush University Medical Center, where this really was lifted up from their community health needs assessment in 2016. And so what they said that they would do is not just strive to be excellent in care delivery and all the other things on the checklist. They wanted to be more mindful about health equity and how they were serving communities in their backyard. And when we say backyard, the medical district in particular. So a table was set, and Rush University Medical Center invited Ascension Health, Cook County Health, Lurie Children's, UI Health, Sinai Chicago to think about their collective power. Because these are competitors, traditionally siloed, right? But the idea was this had to be an all-hands-on-deck approach, that if there were going to be any initial impacts made, there had to be collective thinking. So in February of 2018, this thing called Westside United launched with anchor hospitals locking in to say and answer really the question, what if? What if we set a collective hiring goal? Because our workforce combined is roughly 43,000. So what if we just take 1% of that and direct that toward Westside hires? What if, because we have massive spend capability, about $4 billion annually, what if we take 1% of that and direct that to Black and brown vendors in the West Side for contracts, for selective services? What if, for those of us that have unrestricted revenue, what if we did a bout of social impact investing? What if, because we have over 7,000 live births collectively across our networks, we set targets to think about how we can be impactful for infant mortality and other conditions? So this magical what if led to the formation. But one other critical piece was not negating the voice and place of community, because we did not want to dictate to community what the problems were, what the solutions were. We didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but have this collective, cohesive process. So rewinding back to 2017, before the launch, there was a planning committee put together of 17 members across the West Side, community members, leaders of CBOs, et cetera, that sat across the 6 hospital leaders and their teams to help build out, to help think about what the data showed and what prospective low-hanging fruit could be. So in that process, there were about 1,000 listening sessions across the region. And what came out of that from community were 4 things that people wanted. And I think if we all looked at these, we would say we want the same. Safe neighborhoods was one. Equitable access to care was another. Meaningful things for young people to do / equitable access to education. And the last piece was jobs. So people in the West Side who had the lower life expectancies articulated that those were the things that they thought would be impactful. So we kept that planning committee and embedded them into a governance structure where technically Westside United is a department of Rush, University Medical Center. So Rush raised its hand to incubate this model and mission, but we were always thinking about our ramp off to a separate entity. So this table of hospital leaders, the planning committee came together for an executive leadership council that serves as a pseudo board, and in the near future will be a board, because by the top of fiscal year we will be our own separate entity. So now you have this governance that's a horizontal structure versus your typical hierarchical decision-making body. And in that, you now have community directing where investments go. Community building out RFP processes. Community working side by side and, quite frankly, in the driver's seat to help elevate and activate the different particles and pieces of Westside United and our impact. So I came in after we launched February and May as the first staff hired. And what was very critical, and I will say that I was critical, coming from the other side of the table as an organizer, like, all right, we're not dropping the bag and leaving. And before I take on or move a little further, I need to see skin in the game. So it's very critical, but happy to say that 6 years or 5 years later, systems really rolled up their sleeves to think about what they could do. And as we transition, we will still have that co-governance structure with community in the driver's seat, but there are other things that are critical to our success to date that were all related to our ability to, in some cases, cede power for the systems, name and claim structural racism and historical investment and the roles that systems played in that, in building this continual trust with community. So we fast forward, we're now a team of 15. We have an annual budget around $5 million. Our Our community advisory board is still active, and as mentioned, we will move into the near future with a more formal board structure and as our own independent organization. So in planting that seed, that idea, activating it, thinking about a collective efficacy model, we also brought along additional partners. We have, in addition to our founding hospitals, the AMA as an anchor mission partner, our inaugural partner. And what that means is, and what they wanted to do in connecting their Center for Health Equity was to think about, okay, you all are doing social impact investing, providing low interest capital to businesses in the West Side that are looking at affordable housing and other components. We'd like to give a $5 million commitment to that. We'd also like to think about where there's connection for co-publication supports. How do we leverage and support our brain trust around hypertension management, maternal and child health? So it was this thinking or of coming together of where there were shared focuses and impact, and we're proud to have them as a partner in that category. Next up is Deloitte, right? Next up is a laundry list of folks, because this is an all hands on deck approach for us to grow and keep this list pliable. We also have funders that range from corporate philanthropy, traditional philanthropy, that have been part of our journey in activating this collaborative work. And when you talk about economic vitality work, for us, it is, again, answering and asking, or asking and answering continuously, what if? So if we're gonna do supports in corridors that have not seen sizable investment since 1968, the riots that I mentioned to you in the corridor that my mother inherited in 1968, it's all hands on deck. You need the city, you need private equity, you need all forms of capital. And so as a convener, we've been able to set those tables so that you do see investments in those businesses. You do see hospital contracts secured because those businesses have wraparound supports and access to capital to build their capacity to scale. And so that our list of economic vitality partners range from banks, range from other anchors like the Urban League, City Colleges of Chicago, because again, we need all hands. Now I'll say that we didn't have to do too much convincing once we got our systems around the table in terms of sectoral partnerships, but that it is a continued journey. We are lucky to still have Dr. David Ansel, a founder in this work, an innovator in this work, and quite frankly, you need champions. He is one of the quarterbacks. What he was able to do in terms of bringing his CEO, his board on the table as a white male, I could not do. So when we think about allies and the people in this work to move it ahead, that was very critical, and it still is critical. When we think about our work in neighborhood and the built environment, you also see a thread of churches, you see a thread of entities like the Greater Chicago Food Depository in terms of food equity, and the list goes on and on. So the idea is a seed was planted from a system that brought other systems that also saw the value in bringing community, and that has been hallmark to the model. So this is just a snapshot across the different strategy areas around how we've grown. Now, when you step out and you say you want to eradicate the life expectancy gap, it was very important for us, as you know, to think about how we were going to measure. And in 2019, we put together a data metrics framework working group staffed from the City of Chicago's Department of Public Health, Sinai Urban Health Institute, epidemiologists across our systems to do a decomposition analysis of what the drivers were. And so we created this framework looking at the key drivers. And I've mentioned to you, and I'm sure we could go down the list of the premature deaths, particularly in these communities. I think about my grandmother, I think about my father, but cardiometabolic disease is one, and all of the conditions listed there in terms of key drivers in the gap from a health condition standpoint: cancer, infant mortality, homicide, and opioid overdose. So we layered that on top of our strategies. So we say in order to eradicate the gap, you've got to address education. You've got to look at adult educational attainment, disconnected youth, high school graduation rates, 8th grade math proficiency, 3rd grade reading, kindergarten readiness. And we understand that we cannot boil the ocean as a team of 15, as a collaboration of 6 systems and community partners. This is the work of several Harlem children's zones, quite frankly, right, in our zip codes. But we wanted to identify what the lift was and what it took. And out of our universe, where could we possibly have touch points? Or as a convener, how do we bring together the actors in this space to build a mothership of sorts, hence this measurement tool, so that it all feeds in and it gets us to the North Star. The second tier is economic vitality, so looking at poverty levels for the individual, child, median income, unemployment rates. And so when you think about our work in career pathways or local hiring, there is a potential connection where we can follow people in our zip codes that are employed by our system partners or other sector partners, and we can see their retention rates, the change in salary. Ultimately, we do want people to have family-sustaining, wealth-generating wages. And so we've mapped out that these have to be addressed. Going into neighborhood and built environment, you see measures around food, housing, safety and community. And as it relates to targeted outcomes with health and healthcare, the outcomes related to obesity, psychological distress, behavioral health, hospitalizations, fruits and veggie consumption, healthcare satisfaction. So we called down from hundreds of measures these for our region to zero in on. And I'll tell you, to date, 6 years in, what we can tell you is number of hires, number of investments. So the next leg of our work is to really double down, dig in, have connection for the measures that are relative to our strategy, but also to work towards building an ecosystem that is resource generating for CBOs and other entities that are on the ground that are doing this work, but don't have access to proper measurement or a landing place to track this collectively. I want to point out that in 2020, when we got our first year of data back, so really 2021, around COVID, mortality and morbidity in Chicago, we saw a drop in life expectancy, which was not a surprise, of about 2.3 years on the West Side. And so this is just an illustration of that. If you look at the graph, you see that we have all of our communities, you see what life expectancy was pre-COVID, and then the 2020 numbers. And so we saw that every neighborhood in our geography had a decrease, but that the declines were predominantly worse in our predominantly Latinx communities. The gap itself didn't change between the Loop and the West Side, but communities like Little Village or South Lawndale back home did see almost up to 4 years lost. So prior to the goal of eradicating the gap, we actually had a goal in our early days of decreasing the gap by 50% by 2030. That was audacious. But then we saw these numbers and it went back to us needing to double down and think bigger and think more deeply. And what we had after having a series of forums around the data, what we heard from community was, you guys are great. Your ability to get hospitals and community together is inspiring. This is good work, but I never could, and I won't tell my child they have a 50% chance. I can't tell my communities they have a 50% chance. So Westside United, in partnership with community, can we go get bigger? Can we go deeper? And so one of the rallying cries in doing that and pushing ourselves was this data that came out. And so we reconvened, went into a brain trust to build a data trust to think about what it would take then to think about eradicating the gap. We also on March 5th, 2020, emerged with our plan, our 1,000-day plan for the West Side, mirroring the importance of the first 1,000 days of a child's life. And March 5th, 2020, we had a convening of maybe this size in Chicago, unveiling that plan. That was also the same day Rush University Medical Center admitted its first COVID patient. And this was our plan. We said we would work across accelerating hospital anchor strategies more deeply. We would align more deeply our efforts for community. We would unite and serve as a convener. We would pilot new ideas. And we know what happened a few weeks later, right, in the country and the world. And we had to make a few pivots, but ultimately this was our plan on the page. And so we said, West Side of Chicago, in partnership with our partners and community, we're gonna buy more. So we've committed 1% of our hospital spend across all communities, or across all of our systems, to spend $40 million annually with our systems and local contracts. We wanna go bigger. We wanna develop more businesses. We wanna hire more, so set our annual targets across zip codes. We want to think about the pipeline of Black and brown students in the West Side that get an internship with our systems. Does that turn into apprenticeships? Is it a job? How does that evolve? So we wanted to think more deeply about that. We wanted to invest more. But we also said, going into the next pillar, because we can't boil the ocean across all of the drivers, we're going to zero in, and we're going to look at maternal and child health. We're gonna look at hypertension management. But in order to do that, we've gotta make sure there's some coordination across our system partners, FQHCs. And so we wanna think about how we coordinate better, how we share data, how we think about community-based practice. And we launched something called Westside Healthy Parents and Babies to capture that. For hypertension, we doubled down and coalesced across work that AMA was doing so beautifully around their MAP BP programs, Target BP programs, Release the Pressure campaigns that were outwardly facing and digestible by community. We were coordinating across our systems that had food pantries. There were just, a disjointed nature and environment, so we worked to coordinate those, to think about how screenings and ERs were going. So there was this universe of coordination in this work. But what we saw our strength to be was really as a convener in uniting the West Side and coming together to bring resources to fuel the ideas and the genius of the people who were on the ground, who had solutions, who had lived experiences, but that needed that connection. So in that role of the convener, thinking about how we catalyze resources and partners, how do we go to cities, state, federal tables to advocate? How do we work with funder communities more deeply? And so that was revving up the work we were doing with our community advisory teams, thinking about connection at the city level during COVID. Maybe a month after we unveiled our 1,000-day plan, we got a call from the mayor's office to say, West Side United, we need a coordinated strategy to address the high rates of COVID mortality and morbidity in Black and brown communities on the South and West Sides. There are 6 communities that have the greatest disparity. Can you come to our table because you've brought public health, healthcare, communities together? We need your model. And so what that did was take us from a geography of 10 communities to a geography of 20 across the South and West Sides. And right after we got that call, it was a Sunday night, by the way, cooking dinner. After we got that call, the first call we made was to community. Austin Coming Together, Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation, South Shore Works, because the leaders of those CBOs saw firsthand what the needs were. PPE distribution, they knew the plan. Food, they knew where the greatest needs were. The best way to synthesize and translate data in real time to these communities, they were chief architects with that work along with our data scientists. So for us, we were able to right away replicate that model, bring people in, and we were successful and addressing what the city had called. And that was the formation of the Racial Equity Rapid Response Team that we co-convened, and that led to many other things when we thought about vaccine equity and other pieces that evolved from being reactive to a sense, but also moving ahead to be proactive and have that be embedded in the model in terms of how we think about care delivery and all of the things that needed to be lifted in that space. I'll talk to you about the landing of a laundry linen in the West Side, but what we also found is in our early days, we were piloting. So we were thinking about in 2018, all right, how do we support businesses? Because we've saw through research, we've heard from community that they want better connection. So a pilot of a 80,000 grant pool for 7 businesses, right, grew to $2 million, over 100 plus businesses getting grants. We wanted to think about supporting care delivery. We heard from community, our people don't feel safe coming into systems because of a variety of reasons. So can you help us build a bridge? So we worked to fund the creation of care delivery models where communities like Little Village got funding to enroll 1,500 residents into healthcare through the expansion of a CHW model. We also funded co-location of mental and behavioral health services where FQs worked with local schools to provide things like a social worker. So we saw that as something embedded in our DNA, piloting, and we kept that in our house. So I just wanted to illustrate for you how that setting of the table by healthcare services, the incorporation of community, set us on a trajectory to build this plan that was all-encompassing, thinking about social drivers, core partnerships to address things like COVID and beyond. Few other pieces when we think about our impact to date is this national model for health equity and metrics. And again, we are digging deeper. We want to see those 5,000 plus jobs created have impact in unemployment rates, livable wages, so we've got some room to go there. During COVID, not only did we partner with the city of Chicago to build a racial equity rapid response team, we also got a call from Oprah Winfrey, who said, hey, I haven't given in Chicago in 25 years, I want to help. How do I help? And through a community partner, this is very important, a community partner, a church that was featured in a special that she did with Apple TV. They had lost their matriarch to COVID. And so she went around the country capturing these stories, and this family happened to be the family. And phone calls are very popular for us because we got another phone call saying, can you work with Oprah Winfrey Charitable Foundation to build a response mechanism? And we did. We brought our model and we formed Live Healthy Chicago that allowed us to administer over $4 million in wraparound supports to those communities that were on the ground, lifting up hyper-local efforts. Another example would be our community grocer initiative. So when we think about food access and food equity, in one of our communities, my childhood community to be exact, we had Aldi's close overnight. It was open on Friday, closed by Sunday, sign gone, everything. Just to set context, we had maybe 5 senior centers proximal to Aldi's, so walking distance for people, and it closed. So Monday, our partnerships with Rush, other systems, the aldermen, the community, that led to a protest at Aldi's headquarters, wanting to know why they were not better corporate partners, what the plan was. That then led to the city of Chicago purchasing the land to have it be redeveloped. That then led to an RFP process open to bid, where one of our community organizations has now won the bid to redevelop the store, also put affordable housing there. But in the interim, there had to be work done. So that protest was one, but there was also the formation of this community grocer initiative that created a rubric and other touch points driven by community on what they wanted to see around accountability for corporate actors and others. We know that grocery stores by nature have low profit margins, it's a tough business, and so putting it in a community like a Garfield Park can be a challenge for the business model, and I'll talk more about that. So in the interim, we worked with Black Hawks Foundation, local people on the ground for a pop-up. So when that store closed, there was no active grocery store. We were able to activate with community and our healthcare partners an option for people, and then also a mechanism to bus people to local stores and other border communities. So the work, again, is growing and evolving, led by the vision of community, resourcing them with things that we have access to via our various partnerships. Just want to give a quick snapshot of impact to date. So we launched 6 years ago. I say all the time, we've got out of kindergarten, the training wheels are coming off in terms of the life cycle of the model, and that question that we'll always ask and that I encourage you to ask in dreaming and activating is what if? So our annual hires to date is nearing 7,000. We have employee pathway programs in partnership with Malcolm X that activate tuition reimbursement for incumbent workers. If you're not an incumbent worker, there are wraparound supports for people coming in from community to access these. There are wraparound supports regarding childcare, transportation, that allow non-traditional students and others to have access to become medical assistants, respiratory therapists, et cetera. We have had 635 low-interest loans out to community with $16.3 million being circulated. Again, partners like AMA, Northern Trust, our hospitals that have capability have come together to help drive this work because, again, we can't boil the ocean. We don't look at affordable housing directly, but projects and partnerships like this do allow us to do that. When we think about local spend and procurement, $220 million going back out to West Side businesses. And again, it's the courage of the system leads, it's the courage of the other partners setting the norm, setting the temperature on why this is the right thing to do, why this is important. And then I've already spoken about the small business works. So I just want to point out two catalytic investments, one being the Sankofa Wellness Village. So again, a corridor, not seeing sizable investment since the riots in 1968, but at one point, this corridor was thought to be the Michigan Avenue of the working class. For my people that have been to Chicago, I am assuming you've been to the Mag Mile. Yeah, no, all the great stores. Yes, I see some head nods. Okay. So this very corridor between 1920, 1960s was that, right? It was amazing. It was beautiful. And so beyond the riots, there was a change in demographic as we saw population shifts, the deindustrialization of the region, jobs went out, but the riots really expedited a lot of the continued disinvestment. So we have a church who had a vision of a wellness center 30 years ago. We had actors on the ground in the food equity space. Everyone was kind of in their own little corner. So we were thankful to be part of the creation of an anchor organization that could finally have a catcher's mitt for this organization or this community. And when I say catcher's mitt, a table that could help synthesize investment, move things. And so this was founded in 2019. Neighbors in the Austin community, North Lawndale community, places that had more viable corridors had these tables that were multi-sectored, moving, driven by community. So Garfield Park gets one. And one of the things that we went after, so at this table you've got FQs, you've got hospitals, you've got chambers, you've got Mama Jerry's, women's church group, and very diverse. So we went after a $10 million Pritzker Traubert Chicago Prize for capital investment and improvement. We were the underdogs. We hadn't developed much or anything as a collaborative, but we landed it. We landed $10 million for a $50 million development that was born out of the vision of community. And when we got our marks back on why, one of the notable things was because we had a strong engagement, a strong table, which I know each of you in your work represent different factions and maybe work in community or work across integrated services and care. So this was very important for this community to land this. So 18 months from now, if you're in community or in Chicago, I invite you to come to the Sankofa Wellness Village, where you will find a wellness center curated by Erie Family Health that will provide primary care for roughly 6,000 Westsiders. You have Rush University Medical Center co-locating their Center for Behavioral Health and Well-Being. You have the headquarters of Westside United, the headquarters of Equal Hope, the headquarters of the Garfield Park Right to Wellness Collaborative. You have the YMCA providing recreation. There'll be an elevated indoor track, a basketball court, a cafe, a bank, right? In a community that had to go outside and elsewhere to access that. A block from there, you have a world-class arts center curated by the Mayafa Redemption Project. A block up, you'll have a small business incubator. About a half a mile east, you have that Aldi site, former Aldi site, that will be opening a grocery store with 150 units of affordable housing. Now, I wish I could say there was a magic wand or that baton right there that we used and sprinkled to get this to be. It wasn't the case. It was very hard. There's continued trust building right now happening, building that trust between historical actors, trust that has been lost, or like Dr. Ansel likes to say, earned mistrust, right, between healthcare and communities that we're constantly working through, but it's happening. So for us, that's a huge win in this work and something that we want to replicate in other corridors across the region. And then lastly, we have the Fillmore Center and Linen Service. So again, for us, we're looking inside around the collective impact of our systems where linen was outsourced to Indiana or Wisconsin. In the backyard of the IMD, we now have a linen service that will provide 300 jobs, that has a community investment model or vehicle that will ultimately become a worker-owned co-op. Now, this idea came to Chicago in 2018, curated by World Business Chicago, Chicago Anchors for a Strong Economy. We were replicating the Cleveland Clinic's model around the Evergreen Co-op, and it died, couldn't get it up. This time around, we set a stronger table. We had a funder, I'll say it, a fairy god funder, the Staines Family Foundation, who funded the operation outright. So this is massive because what you see here is massive cost savings for our systems. That's over $1 million. We have Rush and Lurie Children's as the first customers. You have job creation. So when we go back to our model of answering the question, what if, this is one of the answers. And we're looking at other categories. Sterile processing might be next. I mentioned to you the grocery stores that are coming. We're thinking about how we direct spend from systems to purchase from those stores to help drive the engine of keeping them viable options. And so this work is really around the bravery and the ability of systems to step in at 100%, to share power, to direct investment, but most importantly, to listen to community, to activate their visions, to think through where there can be viable change that the people that are most impacted see themselves as being part of the solution, as driving the solution. And so those are hallmarks in our work and in our success. So when we think about eradicating the gap, it is this all hands on deck approach where all of the levers need to continuously be pulled so that we can move ahead, creating a better quality of life for Chicagoans. So I just wanted to share those two pieces. We have other insights that you can connect in around our recent impact reports, our anchor strategies. There's a report highlighting our work with the AMA, a feature in the MIT Sloan School of Management, and then we'll share out some of the work regarding our impact investing data. So here I am, born and raised on the West Side, brought to the West Side through the vision of a grandmother who looked for a better place for her family, who had the opportunity to bring my lived experience in community as an activist, organizer, philanthropy, to step into a space to advocate. And this has been one of the greatest journeys that I've encountered. And I look across the room and know that each of you have a special value add that you bring into your working space. And the one thing that I found most valuable is the ability to be vulnerable on both sides, because we're at the convergence of bringing healthcare and community together. So there's a duality there where we look for opportunities for systems, and there has to be a value add there for participation beyond it being the right thing to do. And then the nuanced engagement and intentionality that is needed to bring community in is very important and central to this work. So I'd like to thank you for your time and hearing from me this morning, learning about our model. And as I understand it, there'll be some music played and we will do a 15 count. No, I'm just joking. We're not going to do that. But we are going to transition into Q&A. So thank you so much for your time. I am told that there are 2 mics in the center of the room. I might be open to a dance battle if you want to, ask that way too. So.
Thank you so much, Ayesha. First a comment, because this is obviously very personal to me. I started my career in Lawndale neighborhood, and it's very, very moving to see what you've done. Lawndale, for those of you who have not been there, is a beautiful community. It's not visually beautiful because of all of the disinvestment and history, but it is a beautiful community when you live there and you have certain eyes to see the people, you see the history, you see the traditions, and all of that. And I think the thing that I come away with here is that you have sort of mined that beauty and the resource that's there to fuel this. And so thank you, first of all. And I know it extends beyond Lawndale, but those are my old stomping grounds. The question I had was, I think for those of us who are clinicians and maybe work in hospital systems, clinics, FQHCs, things like that, sometimes it can feel like what you're talking about is so daunting because it takes so many partnerships, it takes so much work, especially to engage the community. And those of us in healthcare are used to a fast pace, right? We're just kind of surviving day to day, and we see our patients come in with all of these issues that are related to all of these drivers that you're talking about. And I'm wondering how it is that you, on a day in, day out basis, wrap your head around where to focus, how you decide, how you make decisions about how to slow yourself down enough to engage the community, to engage partners. Obviously you have a gift for this, but if you could help those of us who maybe don't have that gift, perhaps, to wrap our heads around this, and also with that, related to the trajectory, right? This is obviously long-term trajectory for you, which is different than us in healthcare, where we're very much day to day, right? Maybe week to week, quarter to quarter. Help us wrap our head around this size, and how you do that for yourself, how you keep yourself engaged and encouraged.
Sure. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the work that you've done in Chicago. So I think one of the first things was having the buy-in from system leads. So there was the bravery, the acknowledgement, the naming and claiming of structural racism and historical disinvestment, the aiding in the inequity, right, that set the tone for the table being set and that being embedded in the DNA of the work. So I'm not saying that that's easy, but maybe we had a cheat sheet because we had people that were willing to say, we've got to do better, and this is how. The how was the continual work of thinking about the collective efficacy and collective impact of partners. What was the value prop? So setting the value proposition for systems. Why, to your point, with everything going on, why now? Why should we do this? Right? So being able to articulate the importance of setting collective hiring goals, thinking about who was coming in from these geographies and how they were being retained, if there was a wealth building trajectory, if there were inequitable tuition reimbursement policies, how we as a collaborative work together to standardize so that there was equity there. So it was the intentionality and buy-in that got us, or got me, like I said, I was skeptical, bought in at 100%, followed by us also having, I always say our jet fuel or secret sauce was having a civic arm of the city bring in pro bono supports. So when we did food equity analyses or the state of food in the West Side and, you know, from retail, et cetera, we had McKinsey come and do a deep dive for us. When we wanted to know more about how we should structure our price points around supply chain diversity, we had PricewaterhouseCoopers come in to do that. So I do have to say, what we've done in 5 years would have taken 10 years. So I think it all goes back to the right table. I was fortunate to have a table of actors, visionaries, but actors, people that wanted to do better, that saw themselves, that could use their power and influence to help permeate this idea and have everyone see themselves in the role that they played. And then following a solid plan. So out of that metrics framework, you see that it's everything from cardiometabolic disease to opioid overdose. We can't do it all. So what keeps me lean is zeroing in, all right, so if Westside United is gonna claim maternal and child health, if we're gonna claim hypertension, okay. But who else in the universe should we be watching so that when we build this mothership and we're ready to connect everyone to do this long-term tracking of impact, how do we build that ecosystem? So for me, it is making sure we have the right table at all times of actors who can pull the necessary levers, and that the fact that the one thing that binds us is the fact that we have to do better, we have to serve our community. So there's an ethos, a buy-in that you have to adopt in order to be at that table. And then once you're there, the work of bringing along the other actors in the ecosystem, bringing community. So for me, it's a pacing, a looking to my right and left to make sure we have everybody, to make sure our governance is true to form in terms of community being at the forefront. And I'm able to work from there. It's not easy. There are many late night calls and things that we have to do, particularly in getting the Garfield Park project up, but those have been the pieces. I've been fortunate to have a table, so I would encourage you all to think about who those people are for you that help you activate if it's the vision for the quarter, the vision for 5 years, the vision for 10, who are the actors in that from A to Z. And so I've been fortunate to be able to activate that way.
Okay. I'm pretty short, so I was trying to dance around the mic a second ago. I was crumping you.
Okay, see, if I'd known that, I would have came down.
Yeah, so I am originally from Chicago, right?
Okay.
I'm from the south side of Chicago, and have stayed at one point a short time in the west side of Chicago. So it is nice to kind of hear like the changes that have been implemented, because I don't live in Chicago. I live in Nashville, but I do visit sometimes. So I want to thank you for your work there. I believe that what I really want to ask you is more so about managing your identity as you're maneuvering through this. So, like, you are, of course, the work that you have done speaks for itself. And then, even the fact that you have a brother or you have access to a world that maybe some providers don't. Now, look, I was a community health worker during the time of COVID, so I also want you to know that the things that you've done, even at a macro level, I would have done. So I'm just more so asking, like, how are you able to manage that and make sure that, you're utilizing that resource, and like you said, you're actors, you know who they are, but making sure that not necessarily that you get the credit because you're being impactful for the community, but that they understand the separation of your identity in this whole movement itself. Does that make sense?
I'm with you. I hope I can let me know if I don't answer it right. But I think I can approach this from a few levels. So one, coming into this work, I had never worked in healthcare. I was doing work that might have been proximal in terms of food equity and some of the touch points there. But I was a newbie. So when I came into this role, I was very hard on myself, like, all right, what value do I bring? That's the CMO. We're talking about health equity. What can I bring to this from that perspective? And then I've reckoned with myself, I can't and I won't, but from that end. But what I do have is insights to community. And I can put together this, in 0.5 seconds and make sure the right voices are heard. So in general, I had to reckon with what my value add was and is as a Black woman born and raised in the West Side. Because that's not enough, right? There are other tentacles that you have to have. So I thought about that. That has also positioned us to be able to move in certain ways in terms of trust building. For me and my team of 15, we have a kit that we have to work from to be able to move into community, but also, like I said, that dichotomy, also be able to articulate the value proposition for our system and multi-sector partners. So for me, I'm able to lead in that way. I'll give a quick example where we have in Sankofa, our wellness village work. It is very heavy in community. And so there were issues around the developer and what they wanted to do in terms of percentage points around the ownership structure, that sort of thing. So I had to put on my West Side woman hat to help smooth out with some of the community members on why they should trust or why new market tax credits are set up this way and it has to be a certain percentage. So I was able to level set in a way that the developer wasn't to be able to move the needle. So I know that that's part of the work, but I think one of the biggest obstacles for me personally was feeling comfortable sitting in people who had been in traditional seats of power and leveling up, knowing that I had just as much power, but from a different vantage point. So that's important. And then just arming the people around me to find that special point right for themselves. So there's a lot of, on that same vein, a lot of mistrust or barriers put up by oh, you're not from the West Side, so you can't be part of this work, or you can't be a leader here, or you can't because you don't know community. So also working in that identity of being a West Sider, helping to cull down and have some open-mindedness or building bridges so that there can be discussion so a developer is welcome or whomever else is welcome is also part of that. And then just in terms of making sure I'm doing the right thing at all times, no matter what side of the table I'm representing is also key. I hope that answered.
It answered a good 99%
Okay,
of it.
all right.
And the last part is just making, how are you, and I believe I can see it in the partnerships, but how are you actually planning to stay relevant post-COVID, right? So you've gotten this money, you've shown that this model works, right? And how do you, how do we move past the idea that, hey, for a lot of people, COVID is, let's be kind to each other. Let's, we should care about mental health. We should care about community, right? And I think this is going to be a little tougher. It may not be tougher because I feel like you'll have a direct answer, but also understanding that you are a minority in this situation is also a little different because we kind of are built with the idea of this, we understand the sense of community, but really just how do you stay relevant? How does the sense of community stay relevant post-COVID? And then that's it.
Sure. I think for us, we started with community, so that was our benefit, right? Community was brought in pre-COVID as a key piece of this work, as drivers of this work. When we did our first social impact investments, that happened in a boardroom on the West Side with community members, not at Northern Trust headquarters, right? So that's been very important to the model. So I think we've done an okay job of maintaining that. Our value add is as a convener for community and our health system. So I think our ability to continue to push there. What we saw in COVID was everybody, or not everybody, but there was a contingency of people that thought what we were already doing was cool, right? So some of the investments came because people needed something, and unfortunately it was a pandemic to attach themselves to. And at the same time, unfortunately, we had George Floyd and a few other things where we saw people stand up and invest in a different way, set these initiatives. But I'd like to say we were a few steps ahead of the game. And so what we're seeing by bringing the model to the city's table for vaccine equity work and now for larger initiatives that are activating the Department of Public Health's health plan for the city, we're taking that model, and these catalytic investments that I've mentioned are continuing to have us be a focal point and not, I don't want to say duplicated because we do want to share the model for where it works, but we still have that unique value proposition as a convener. And the theme around community is something that we'll always stick to. And as we go on our road shows to Boston and other places around the country, people want to know three things. How do you measure? How did you get competitors and health systems around one table? And three, how do you engage community? And I think we're still working to be innovative in those ways, and that's helping us stay relevant on both sides, from community and from our multi-sector partners. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayesha. I just can say, wow. While you were talking, I really appreciate that you were sharing some pictures of your family growing up. You were talking, and all of a sudden, I started imagining that little girl with the martial arts dress speaking. I was just like, okay, that started shifting and changing boys' lives in that sport, and look at her now, changing a complete community. So thank you so much for that and reminding us the importance of partnership, connecting with the correct allies, and mainly persistence. The importance of persistence and not to lose focus of your mission and your goal. Thank you so much. I also have to tell you that your brother happened to be the favorite rapper of our now former president, and he had a freak out moment, so please don't leave without taking a picture with him. Deepu?
I didn't know Martha was going to out my Lupe crush like that, but I am coming back up to first welcome a contingency of community health workers that have been part of our conference this year. And this is just an announcement. If you are a community health worker attending this conference, if you can come towards the stage, Neftali, myself, and Jason, one, would just like to welcome you, get to know you, but also you are an important developing membership in our community, and we want to make sure that as we work with you, we are developing things that are meaningful and important for you. So if you are a CHW or a promotora, come to the front right here so we can connect with you before you leave. Thank you so much. You guys are now dismissed to get coffee.